Growing up, I was nothing but a footnote in my own family's story. My name is Vanessa Reynolds, and for as long as I can remember, my parents treated my older sister Diane like their personal investment, while I was just an afterthought they'd occasionally remember to feed. What they never expected was that one day I'd own the roof over their heads, and they wouldn't have a clue until it was too late. I can still picture the exact moment I realized my place in our family wasn't going to change. I was 16, sitting at our kitchen island, proudly clutching my ACT results. A near-perfect score that had my guidance counselor talking about Ivy League possibilities. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled slightly as I waited for my parents to look up from their phones. "Mom, Dad, I got my test scores back," I said, pushing the paper toward them. Mom glanced up, distracted. "That's nice, honey. Did you pick up those dry cleaning items I asked for?" "Yes, but look, I scored in the 99th percentile. My counselor says with this and my GPA, I could get scholarships to—" Dad cut me off mid-sentence, his attention captured by something on his phone. "Diana just posted photos from her sorority formal. Look at this, Miranda," he said, turning his screen toward Mom. "Our girl looks like a movie star." And just like that, my achievement evaporated into thin air, replaced by my sister's carefully filtered Instagram photos. I sat there, the paper with my scores suddenly feeling worthless in my hands, as my parents cooed over Diana's strapless blue dress and perfect smile. Diana was 5 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, our home operated as her personal fan club. The walls were adorned with her dance recital photos, swimming trophies, and academic certificates. My accomplishments, when noticed at all, were acknowledged with distracted nods and quick, "That's nice, sweetie" comments before the conversation inevitably swung back to Diana. "Diana's professor says she has real potential in corporate law," Dad would announce at dinner. "Diana's internship supervisor invited her to a networking event with the partners," Mom would gush. Meanwhile, I'd sit silently, pushing food around my plate, wondering if they'd notice if I simply disappeared. But someone did notice me, my grandfather, Walter Reynolds, Dad's father. While my parents were busy fawning over Diana's every move, Grandpa Walt saw me. Grandpa Walt lived across town in a modest brick house that sat on almost an acre of land in what had become one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods. The developers had been circling for years, offering him increasingly obscene amounts of money to sell, but he'd always laugh them off. "Land is the only thing they aren't making more of, Vanessa," he'd tell me during our Sunday afternoons together. "Remember that. While everyone else chases paper profits and digital fortunes, real wealth sits quietly beneath your feet." Those Sundays with Grandpa were my sanctuary. While my parents drove Diana to weekend networking events or helped her shop for professional attire, I'd ride my bike to Grandpa's house, where he'd teach me about investments, property values, and the patience required for both. "You know what makes you special, Nessa?" he asked me once as we sat on his back porch drinking lemonade and looking out at his meticulously maintained garden. "You listen. You observe. Your sister makes noise, but you make notes." He tapped his temple with a weathered finger. "That's going to take you further in the long run." Grandpa had built a successful commercial real estate business from nothing, starting with a single fixer-upper after returning from Vietnam. He'd expanded slowly, methodically, focusing on location and potential rather than quick flips. By the time he sold his company and retired, he'd accumulated significant wealth, though you'd never know it from his modest lifestyle. "Most people broadcast their success," he told me once. "The truly successful don't have to." At home, I tried to make myself visible. I maintained a perfect GPA. I captained the debate team. I won the state economics competition 2 years running. But somehow, my achievements always seemed to pale in comparison to whatever Diana was doing. The summer before my senior year, my parents threw Diana a lavish graduation party when she finished law school. They invited everyone they knew, rented a hall, and hired a professional photographer. I spent the evening serving drinks to their friends, all of whom asked if I was going to follow in my sister's footsteps. Actually, I'm interested in real estate development and investment, I told one of Dad's colleagues, a rare moment of someone actually asking about my plans. Dad overheard and laughed, placing his arm around my shoulders in a way that seemed affectionate but felt constraining. Vanessa's just being modest. She's got the Reynolds academic genes too. We're expecting great things from her in law or medicine, aren't we, sweetheart? I smiled tightly, my dreams dismissed in a single breath. Later that night, as guests were leaving, I overheard Mom talking to her sister in the kitchen. Of course we've got Vanessa's college fund all set up, she said, wine glass in hand. We started it the day she was born, just like we did for Diana. 4 years at a good school doesn't come cheap, but that's what parents do, right? Sacrifice for their children's future. I leaned against the wall outside the kitchen, a strange comfort washing over me. At least they had planned for my education. At least in that way, I mattered as much as Diana. The next morning, I drove to Grandpa's house, eager to share my decision to apply early to UCLA's real estate development program. It was one of the best in the country, and with my grades and test scores, I had a real shot. When I arrived, I found Grandpa sitting in his favorite chair, but something was off. His usual alertness had dimmed, his movements slow and deliberate. "Grandpa? Are you okay?" I asked, setting down my bag. He gave me a weak smile. "Just tired, Nessa. Getting old isn't for the faint of heart." But it wasn't just age. A week later, the diagnosis came: pancreatic cancer, already stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months at best. I was devastated. "Don't waste time crying over me," he said when I visited him at the hospital, his voice stronger than his body looked. "I've had a good run. Now I'm more concerned about yours." Through that fall, as I worked on college applications, I split my time between school and Grandpa's house. His condition deteriorated rapidly, but his mind remained sharp. We still talked about real estate and investments, but our conversations took on a more urgent, focused quality. "You remember Jenkins Street downtown?" he asked me one afternoon. I nodded. "The old warehouse district that's being revitalized." "Smart. Girl, I bought a building there in the 90s when everyone thought I was crazy. Dirt cheap. It's worth 20 times that now." He coughed, then continued. "The point is, sometimes you have to see value where others don't. Sometimes you have to make your own opportunities when no one will give them to you." In December, I received my acceptance letter to UCLA. It came with a partial scholarship, but I'd still need significant financial help. I couldn't wait to tell my parents, finally, something they'd have to be proud of. I'd been accepted to a prestigious program at a top university. Even Diana hadn't gotten into UCLA. I waited until dinner, when I knew I'd have their full attention. Diana was visiting for the holidays, but for once I didn't mind sharing the spotlight. My news was big enough to stand on its own. "I have something to tell you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I placed the acceptance letter on the table. "I got into UCLA's real estate program." Diana picked up the letter first. "UCLA? That's actually impressive, little sis." Her surprise at my achievement stung, but at least it was recognition. Mom took the letter next, scanning it quickly. "Real estate? I thought you were applying for pre-law programs." "No, Mom. I've been talking about real estate development for years. This is one of the best programs in the country." Dad frowned, taking the letter from Mom. "These California schools are expensive. How much is this going to cost us?" The question caught me off guard. I got a partial scholarship, but I'd still need to use my college fund. It should cover most of it, and I can work part-time for the rest. A strange silence fell over the table. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. "What?" I asked, looking between them. "What's wrong?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dad cleared his throat, setting down the letter. Vanessa, there's something we need to discuss about your college fund. What about it? It's not available anymore, Mom said carefully, not meeting my eyes. The room seemed to tilt sideways. What do you mean not available? Where is it? Diana shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suddenly very interested in her wine glass. We had to make some adjustments to our finances this year, Dad said, his voice taking on the formal tone he used when discussing business. Diana's law school loans were substantial, and with the housing market downturn affecting my business, you used my college fund to pay off Diana's loans? I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Not entirely, Mom interjected quickly. Some of it went toward helping Diana with the down payment on her condo. Real estate in Chicago is expensive, and it was a smart investment opportunity that we couldn't pass up. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline, for someone to tell me this was all an elaborate joke. But their expressions, Dad's defensive posture, Mom's averted gaze, Diana's studied nonchalance, told me everything I needed to know. You gave my future to Diana, I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the storm raging inside me. Again, don't be dramatic, Dad said. We're just shifting resources where they're needed most. Diana is established in her career now. These first few years are critical for her professional development. And my development doesn't matter? I asked. Course it matters, Mom said. But UCLA is excessive. The state university has a perfectly adequate business program, and you can live at home to save on expenses. I've worked my entire life for this opportunity, I said, feeling something break inside me. I've maintained perfect grades, perfect test scores, perfect everything, hoping you'd finally notice. Notice what? Diana interrupted, her tone condescending. That you've been silently competing with me this whole time? It's not my fault. You chose to live in my shadow, Vanessa. I looked at my sister, the golden child, the favorite, the one whose future was so important that mine had to be sacrificed for it, and felt a clarity I'd never experienced before. I didn't choose your shadow, Diana. I was placed there. I stood up, gathering my acceptance letter. No one tried to stop me as I walked out of the dining room. Behind me, I heard the conversation shift immediately back to Diana's recent court, victory and her prospects for early partnership. That night, I drove to the hospital. Visiting hours were over, but the night nurse knew me and looked the other way as I slipped into Grandpa's room. He was awake, as if he'd been expecting me. They gave away my college fund, I said without preamble, sinking into the chair beside his bed. To Diana, for her loans and a condo down payment. Grandpa didn't look surprised. Your father always did play favorites. Got that from his mother. He reached for my hand. What are you going to do about it? The question caught me off guard. I'd expected sympathy, outrage on my behalf. Not this challenge. What can I do? The money's gone. That's not what I asked, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. I asked what you're going to do about it. I stared at him, understanding, slowly dawning. You knew this would happen. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. I suspected. Your father has always been predictable in his decisions. Disappointing, but predictable. So now what? I can't afford UCLA without that money. I can't, Vanessa, he interrupted, squeezing my hand. Remember what I've taught you all these years. When one door closes, find a window, I finished. For him. It was one of his favorite sayings. Exactly. Now, in the top drawer of my bedside table, there's an envelope. Get it for me, would you? I did as he asked, pulling out a sealed manila envelope with my name written on it in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. I wasn't planning to give you this until after I was gone, he said. But I think you need it now more than ever. What is it? Insurance, he said. Against exactly this kind of situation. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a set of legal documents that I didn't fully understand. I looked at Grandpa questioningly. "Read the letter," he said simply. I unfolded the single sheet of paper and began to read. "My dearest Vanessa, if you're reading this, then one of two things has happened. Either I've passed on, or your parents have finally shown their true colors regarding your future. Either way, it's time you knew the truth. For the past 10 years, I've been quietly building something for you. While your parents focused their resources and attention on Diana, I focused mine on you. I recognized in you the same keen mind for business and property that I've always had, something your father unfortunately lacks despite his profession. What you hold in your hands are the documents for the Vanessa Reynolds Trust. On your 18th birthday, you will assume control of this trust, which currently holds ownership of 3 commercial properties in the city, details in the attached documents, and liquid assets of approximately $780,000. Yes, you read that correctly. This money and these properties are yours, free and clear. Neither your parents nor Diana have any knowledge of this trust, and legally, they have no claim to it. I've made certain of that. Use this to forge your own path, Vanessa. Get your education. Build your empire. And remember what I've always told you. Real wealth sits quietly beneath your feet. All my love, Grandpa Walt P.S. You might be particularly interested in the 3rd property listed. I believe you're familiar with the address." I lowered the letter, my hands shaking. "Grandpa, this says, is this real?" "As real as the ground beneath this hospital," he said, his eyes twinkling despite the pallor of his skin. "Check the property listings." I fumbled with the documents, turning to the list of properties held by the trust. The first 2 were commercial. Buildings downtown, valuable real estate in the city's growing business district. But it was the 3rd listing that made my heart stop. 2 Oakwood Lane. My parents' address? I looked up at Grandpa, my mind racing to connect the dots. "This says the trust owns my parents' house. That's not possible. They've owned that house for 20 years. "They've lived in it for 20 years, Grandpa corrected, gently. "But they never owned it. I did. When your father and mother were struggling after Diana was born, I bought the house and let them live there, paying me what they could afford. The arrangement continued over the years. They've essentially been paying rent, though your father's pride required we call it a family mortgage arrangement." I sat back in my chair, stunned. "So this trust, my trust, owns the house my parents live in?" "As of last month, yes, Grandpa." "Confirmed." I transferred the deed from my holdings to the trust. Your parents don't know about this change yet. They still send the payments to my management company, which now redirects them to your trust account. So I'm their landlord? The concept was so absurd I almost laughed. Technically the trust is, until you turn 18. Then yes, you will be. He reached for my hand again. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? I stared at the documents in my lap, possibilities unfolding in my mind like a map to a future I never dared imagine. UCLA was suddenly within reach again, more than within reach. And beyond that, I'm going to use it, I said finally, a new determination hardening in my voice. Not to hurt them, but to build something they can't ignore or dismiss. I met my grandfather's gaze. I'm going to build something so big that they'll never be able to look past me again. Grandpa's smile widened, pride shining in his eyes. That's my girl. Now there's something else you should know about that 3rd property. As the hospital lights dimmed for the night and the monitors beeped softly in the background, Grandpa Walt revealed the final pieces of his carefully constructed safety net. one that would not only secure my future, but fundamentally change my family's power dynamics forever. What my parents didn't know wouldn't just hurt them, it would completely transform their reality, and they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. 3 weeks after Grandpa Walt revealed the truth about the trust, he slipped away peacefully in his sleep. I was there, holding his hand, when the monitors flatlined and the nurses rushed in. In his final days, we'd spent hours refining my plan. Not for revenge, but for independence. "Don't waste energy on getting even," he'd told me. "Focus on getting ahead." The funeral was held on a bitter January morning, the cemetery blanketed in fresh snow that crunched beneath our feet as we followed the casket to its final resting place. My parents stood stoically beside me, Dad's arm wrapped mechanically around Mom's shoulders. Diana had flown in from Chicago, making sure everyone knew what an inconvenience it was to rearrange her court schedule. I noticed how she positioned herself prominently beside Dad when the funeral director asked family members to step forward, always center stage, even in grief. Walter Reynolds was a self-made man, the minister intoned as icy wind whipped around. He built his success through determination, foresight, and integrity. I caught Dad shifting uncomfortably at these words. Did he know how disappointed Grandpa had been in him? How Grandpa had seen through his materialistic facade to the insecure man beneath? After the service, people gathered at my parents' house, Grandpa's house, technically my house, though no one knew it yet. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, accepting condolences with quiet nods while observing the subtle power dynamics at play. Diana worked the room like a politician, sharing carefully curated special memories of Grandpa with tearful precision, though I could count on one hand the number of times she'd visited him in the past 5 years. "Your grandfather was so proud of you girls," one of Grandpa's old business associates told us, catching Diana and me together near the buffet table. He always said his granddaughters were his greatest legacy. Diana smiled graciously. "He taught us so much about ambition and success." I bit back a bitter laugh. Diana had barely listened to anything Grandpa said, too busy checking her phone during the rare occasions she accompanied our parents to his house for holiday dinners. "He certainly did," I agreed quietly. "Especially about seeing value where others don't." The man nodded approvingly. Walter was a master at that. His foresight with real estate was uncanny. "Speaking of real estate," Diana said, smoothly redirecting the conversation. "Did you hear I just bought my first condo? Dad and Mom helped with the down payment, a graduation gift." She beamed, casting a sideways glance at me. "It's in Riverside Heights, that new luxury development downtown." The subtle dig wasn't lost on me. Diana knew exactly what she'd cost me with my parents' generosity toward her. "How wonderful," the man replied, then turned to me. "And what about you, Vanessa? You must be thinking about college soon." Before I could answer, Diana jumped in. "Vanessa's looking at state. Their business program is adequate." Her tone conveyed exactly what she thought of my prospects. "Actually," I said, meeting her gaze steadily, "I'll be attending UCLA in the fall. Full ride." It wasn't technically a lie. With Grandpa's trust, I could afford the full cost of attendance without breaking a sweat. But the look of surprise on Diana's face was worth the slight stretching of the truth. "UCLA? When did that happen?" she asked, clearly caught off guard. "I've always had options, Diana. Some are just less visible than others." As the gathering wore on, I excused myself and slipped into Grandpa's, my father's, home office. I needed a moment alone, away from the performative grief and social maneuvering. The room smelled of Dad's cologne and leather furniture, his law credentials framed pretentiously on the wall. I ran my fingers along the edge of the mahogany desk, wondering if he had any idea that he was essentially borrowing this space from me now. The door opened, and Dad's law partner, Martin Kessler, stepped in. He looked surprised to find me there, Sorry, Vanessa. I was looking for your father. He's in the living room basking in sympathy, I said before I could stop myself. Martin raised an eyebrow. Rough day. Yes. He hesitated, then closed the door behind him. Your grandfather was a good man, one of the smartest business minds I ever knew. Thank you. He talked about you a lot, you know, whenever we met for our monthly lunches. This caught me off guard. You had regular lunches with my grandfather? Martin nodded. For years, Walter consulted me on some of his business matters, legal things. He studied me carefully. He was particularly interested in trust law. My heart raced. Did Martin know about my trust? Walter believed in preparing for all contingencies, he continued. A man in his position needed to ensure his affairs were in order. And were they? I asked cautiously. Impeccably, Martin said with a small smile. Your grandfather left nothing to chance. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a business card, offering it to me. If you need anything, legal advice or otherwise, please call me directly. Walter asked me to look out for your interests. I took the card, understanding dawning. Martin wasn't just Dad's partner. He was my grandfather's confidant, and now potentially my ally. Thank you, I said simply. He nodded and turned to leave, then paused with his hand on the doorknob. By the way, congratulations on UCLA. Your grandfather mentioned you had your heart set on their real estate program. After Martin left, I sat in my father's chair, turning his business card over in my hands. Another piece of Grandpa's puzzle was falling into place. He hadn't just left me money and property, he'd arranged for legal protection as well. The next morning, I visited the offices of Bennett, Cohen and Associates, the firm that managed Grandpa's trust. Mr. Bennett, a thin man, with wire-rimmed glasses, greeted me solemnly in the conference room. Miss Reynolds, first, my condolences on your grandfather's passing. He was not only a valued client, but a friend. Thank you, I said, settling into the leather chair across from him. As the successor trustee indicated in the Vanessa Reynolds trust, I've prepared the documents transferring control to you, effective on your 18th birthday next month. He slid a thick folder across the table. However, there are some matters that need immediate attention. What kind of matters? Your grandfather made some additional arrangements in his final weeks, modifications to the trust. Mr. Bennett adjusted his glasses, specifically regarding the property at 1492 Oakwood Lane. My parents' house. My house. What about it? The terms of your parents' occupancy need to be formalized now that ownership has transferred to the trust. Your grandfather had a gentleman's agreement with your father. Rather informal. Mr. Bennett's tone made it clear what he thought of such arrangements. We need to establish a proper lease agreement. And my parents will need to sign this new lease? Yes, though they needn't know who the new owner is. The trust can remain the named landlord, keeping your identity confidential if you prefer. I considered this, remembering Grandpa's advice. The element of surprise is sometimes your greatest advantage in business. I'd prefer that for now, I decided. What else did my grandfather modify? Mr. Bennett pulled out another document. He established a separate educational trust specifically for your UCLA expenses. Tuition, housing, books, living expenses, all covered. The funds are already being transferred directly to the university. A lump formed in my throat. Even in his final days, Grandpa had been working to secure my future. There's one more thing, Mr. Bennett added, his expression softening slightly. A letter. Your grandfather asked that I give this to you after he was gone. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. I took it, resisting the urge to open it immediately. Some things were meant to be private. As I left the office, paperwork in hand and Grandpa's letter, tucked safely in my bag, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The ground beneath my feet felt solid in a way it never had before. That evening at dinner, Mom mentioned casually that they'd received some paperwork from Walt's estate lawyers regarding the house. Just a formality, Dad said, cutting into his steak. Apparently, the house was still technically in Dad's name. Something about avoiding gift taxes. He shrugged. Martin says it's nothing to worry about, just a new lease arrangement with the family trust until the title transfer is complete. Does that affect our payments? Mom asked. No change there. We'll just send the checks to the trust management company instead of Dad's old firm. He took a sip of wine. Martin says the trust is primarily for tax purposes, smoke and mirrors to keep the government's hands out of our pockets. He chuckled. Dad was always clever that way. I focused on my plate, careful to keep my expression neutral. So nothing really changes? Not a thing, Princess, Dad assured me, oblivious to the irony of using that endearment, his special nickname for Diana, on me. The house is as good as ours, just as it's always been. I nodded, thinking of the lease agreement sitting in Mr. Bennett's office, waiting for their signatures, a document that would formalize their status as tenants in my property. By the way, I said, changing the subject, I've decided to take a gap year before college. Mom looked up sharply. A gap year? Vanessa, we talked about this. You'll attend state in the fall and live at home to save money. Actually, I've got other plans, I said calmly. I want to learn more about real estate development firsthand. Maybe travel a bit, see how different cities approach urban planning. Dad frowned. That sounds expensive and unnecessary. I've got it covered, I said. I applied for some special programs and scholarships. It wasn't entirely untrue. I had applied to an exclusive real estate mentorship program in Los Angeles, one that Grandpa had told me about. What I didn't mention was that I'd already been accepted, or that I planned to attend UCLA part-time during my gap year to get a head start on my degree. Well, we'll discuss it more later, Dad said dismissively, already reaching for his phone to check his messages. The conversation shifted to Diana's latest court victory, and I retreated into my thoughts, planning my next moves. Later that night, alone in my room, I finally opened Grandpa's letter. His handwriting was frailer than in his previous letter, the words sometimes trailing off, but his message was clear. My dearest Nessa, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next. Don't waste time grieving for me. I've had a good life, full of more success than failure and more joy than sorrow. And much of that joy came from watching you grow into the remarkable young woman you've become. You now stand at a crossroads that few people your age ever encounter. The trust I've established gives you financial independence and, yes, a certain power over your family situation. How you use that power will define not just your relationship with your parents and sister, but the kind of person you become. Didn't create this trust so you could punish them, Nessa. I created it to free you from their limitations, the narrow vision they have for your life and your potential. Your father never understood that true wealth isn't about accumulating possessions or status symbols. It's about creating options for yourself and security for those you love. He chased the appearance of success rather than building something lasting. Don't make the same mistake. Use the resources I've left you wisely. Get your education. Build your own empire. But remember that business is ultimately about people, how you treat them, how you negotiate with them, how you help them see value where they missed it before. Your parents and Diana will eventually discover the truth about the trust and your role in it. When that day comes, you'll have a choice to make, leveraging your position for retribution or for reconciliation. I hope you'll choose the latter, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to live without the burden of bitterness. Believe in you, Nessa. You have my business sense, but you also have something I took too long to develop. Wisdom about what truly matters. All my love, Grandpa Walt P.S. Check the safe in my home office. Combination is your birthday. There's something there I want you to have, something more personal than property deeds and bank accounts. I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face. Leave it to Grandpa to challenge me even from beyond the grave, to push me to be better than my circumstances, better than my grievances. The next day, I drove to Grandpa's house, my other house now. The property management company had already secured it, changing the locks and setting up the security system as instructed by Mr. Bennett. I used the new key to let myself in, walking through the quiet rooms that still felt full of Grandpa's presence. His home office was exactly as he'd left it, books lining the shelves, his reading glasses resting on the antique desk, the faint smell of his pipe tobacco lingering in the air. The safe was hidden behind a painting of the city skyline, one of the few extravagances Grandpa had allowed himself. I entered my birthday, and the safe clicked open. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with intricate carvings. I recognized it immediately, Grandpa's prized possession, a box his own grandfather had made by hand. He'd shown it to me once, explaining that it contained his most treasured mementos. Inside the box was a vintage Rolex watch, Grandpa's first major purchase when his business began to succeed. There was also a small velvet pouch containing his Vietnam service medals, a few old photographs, and a folded piece of paper that turned out to be my grandmother's handwritten cookie recipe, the one Grandpa claimed had won his heart before. He'd even asked her name, but it was the item at the bottom of the box that caught my breath. A small, worn, leather-bound notebook. I opened it carefully, recognizing Grandpa's handwriting. It was a journal he'd kept for years, recording not financial transactions or business deals, but life lessons. And on the inside cover, a newly added inscription, for Vanessa, my brightest. Investment, my greatest return. Grandpa Walters. I flipped through the pages. I realized this wasn't just any journal. It was a guidebook. Grandpa's accumulated wisdom about business, property, and people, distilled into concise entries that read like a masterclass in success. Some entries were philosophical. The best deals happen when both parties walk away, believing they've won something valuable. Others were practical. Never reveal your bottom line until you've heard theirs. Patience in negotiation isn't just a virtue, it's a tactic. And some were deeply personal. Watched V present her economics. Project today, she has that rare quality, the ability to make complex ideas simple without making them simplistic. She'll go further than I ever did if she's given the chance. I sat at Grandpa's desk, holding his legacy in my hands, and realized that he had given me something far more valuable than property or money. He'd given me his knowledge, his confidence in me, and a path forward that I could walk on my own terms. 2 days later, my parents signed the new lease agreement for their house, completely unaware that they were now officially my tenants. Dad barely glanced at the paperwork, signing where indicated and handing it off to Mom to countersign. Just administrative nonsense, he muttered. The lawyers always need to justify their fees. That same afternoon, I received confirmation that my UCLA housing deposit had been processed and that I had a place in the freshman dorm for the fall semester. I also got the official welcome package from the Gibson Real Estate Fellowship in Nassau, Los Angeles, the exclusive mentorship program that would occupy my supposed gap year. Everything was falling into place, just as Grandpa had arranged. But as I packed away his journal and contemplated my next steps, I realized that the easy part was over. Grandpa had set the stage, but what happened next was entirely up to me, the Ahi. Real challenge wasn't becoming my parents' landlord without their knowledge. The real challenge would be deciding what kind of landlord, what kind of person, I wanted to be when they finally discovered the truth. That evening, I sat on the back porch of Grandpa's house, my house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I opened his journal to a random page and found an entry that seemed written precisely for this moment. Power isn't about controlling others. It's about creating a reality where you can't be controlled by them. Use it wisely, or it will use you. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, I made my decision. I wouldn't use my newfound power to hurt my family or extract revenge for years of neglect. But I wouldn't surrender it either. Instead, I would use it to build something so undeniable that they would have to see me, truly see me, for the first time. Little did I know that my resolve would be tested sooner than I expected, when a late-night call from Diana would threaten to unravel everything Grandpa had so carefully put in place. Diana's call came at 11:42 p.m., her ringtone slicing through the quiet of my bedroom like an alarm. I stared at her name on my screen, tempted to let it go to voicemail. Diana never called me. Texting was her preferred method of communication, usually terse messages about family obligations or requests for me to drop something off at her condo when I was in the area. "Hello?" I answered, unable to mask the wariness in my voice. "Vanessa." Diana's voice sounded strange, tight and waterlogged, as if she'd been crying. "I need your help." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Everything." A shuddering breath. "I got fired today." Of all the scenarios I'd imagined, this wasn't among them. Diana, perfect, golden Diana, fired from her prestigious associate position at Hamlin and Reed, Chicago's elite corporate law firm? "What happened?" I asked, struggling to process this. "Development. Politics. Office politics." Diana's voice hardened. "The partner I was working under got pushed out in some power play, and they're cleaning house. Anyone associated with him is gone." "Did they give you severance?" "Barely. 1 month." She let out a bitter laugh. "Do you know how much my mortgage is? And the condo fees? Not to mention my credit card debt and car payment?" I did know, actually. After gaining access to the trust documents, I'd made it my business to understand my family's financial situation in detail. Diana lived well beyond her means, counting on future earnings and eventual partnership to justify her current spending. Her condo in Riverside Heights cost nearly twice what she should have been able to afford on her associate's salary. "Have you told Mom and Dad?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "God, no." Diana's voice dropped to a horrified whisper. "I can't tell them, Vanessa. Dad pulled strings to get me that job. He's been bragging about me to everyone in his firm, and they already helped with the condo down payment." I leaned back against my headboard, considering the implications. Diana's carefully constructed image as the successful daughter was crumbling, and she was desperate to hide it. "What do you need from me?" I asked cautiously. "I need a loan," she said, her voice steadying as she moved into negotiation mode. "Just until I land on my feet. 3 months of expenses should do it. I've already got interviews lined up at 2 other firms." "How much?" she hesitated. 30,000. I nearly choked. $30,000? Diana, I'm 17. Where exactly do you think I'm going to get that kind of money? "From Grandpa," she said, her tone shifting from desperate to calculating. "Don't play dumb, Vanessa. I know he left you something." A chill ran through me. "What are you talking about?" "Please," Diana scoffed. "I saw how you two were. All those Sunday afternoons together, those private conversations. Grandpa adored you." There was a bitter edge to her words. "And then suddenly you're going to UCLA, with a full ride out of nowhere? Right after he dies? I'm not stupid." My mind raced. How much did she actually know? Was she fishing, or did she have concrete information about the trust? "Whatever Grandpa left me is for my education," I said carefully. "For UCLA." "So he did leave you something." Diana pounced on the implicit confirmation. "Look, I'm not asking. For a handout. It's a loan. I'll pay you back with interest once I'm settled at a new firm. 6%. That's fair." The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being the family afterthought, Diana was now coming to me for financial help, offering terms as if I were a bank. In a way, I was. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "This isn't a small amount we're talking about." "I don't have time for you to think about it," Diana snapped, her desperation breaking through again. "My mortgage payment is due next week and my checking account is nearly empty. I've already maxed out 2 credit cards keeping up appearances." "Then maybe it's time to stop keeping up appearances," I suggested. "Tell Mom and Dad the truth. They've always bailed you out before." "You don't understand what's at stake here," Diana said, her voice low and urgent. "Dad's firm is in trouble. The Phillips merger fell through last month, and they're hemorrhaging clients. He can't afford to help me right now, and asking would just add to his stress." This was news to me. I knew Dad's boutique law firm handled mainly real estate transactions and corporate mergers, but I hadn't heard anything about financial troubles. "How do you know this?" I asked. "Martin told me," Diana said. "We've been talking. He's been filling me in on the firm's situation. Dad doesn't know." Martin Kessler, Dad's partner, Grandpa's lunch companion, and now apparently Diana's confidant. The pieces were shifting on the board in unexpected ways. "I'll need a day," I said finally. "I need to look at my options." Diana started to protest, but I cut her off. "One day, Diana. That's reasonable for a $30,000 loan. I'll call you tomorrow night." After hanging up, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and weighing my options. Diana's revelation about Dad's firm added a new dimension to consider. If his business was truly struggling, it could affect his ability to pay rent on the house. My house. The next morning, I drove to Grandpa's house again, needing the quiet space to think. As I sat at his desk, flipping through his journal for guidance, my phone rang. Martin Kessler's name appeared on the screen. "Vanessa," he greeted me when I answered. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I said, wondering at the timing. "What can I do for you?" "I thought we should talk," Martin said, his tone carefully neutral. "About your sister's situation." My guard immediately went up. "What about it?" "She told me she approached you for financial assistance last night." "Did she also tell you how much she asked for?" I countered. Martin sighed. "Yes, it's substantial, particularly to ask of someone your age. Yet she seemed confident I could provide it," I said pointedly. "I wonder why." A pause. "Your grandfather made certain arrangements for your future. Diana has suspicions about their extent. And you know about these arrangements." "Some of them," Martin admitted. "Walter consulted me on certain aspects. Client confidentiality prevented me from being involved in the entire process, but he wanted me to be aware enough to protect your interests if necessary." "And is that what you're doing now? Protecting my interests? Or Diana's?" Another pause. "Both, ideally. Diana is in genuine financial trouble, but her request places you in a difficult position. I thought perhaps I could help facilitate a solution that works for everyone." "I'm listening." "Diana doesn't need $30,000, Martin said. "Her immediate crisis could be resolved with half that amount. The rest is cushion. For her pride, mainly? I considered this. And my father's firm? She mentioned it's in trouble." Martin hesitated. "We've had better years. The commercial real estate market is volatile right now, and several key clients have delayed projects. It's creating cash flow issues." "Serious ones?" "Nothing fatal," Martin assured me. "But your father has been using his personal funds to cover some of the firm's shortfalls. It's putting pressure on your family's finances." The pieces were falling into place now. Dad's dismissive attitude about my college fund, his eagerness to have me attend state and live at home. It wasn't just favoritism toward Diana. The family was facing financial constraints he didn't want to acknowledge. "Thank you for the context," I said. "It helps." May I offer a suggestion? Martin asked. Of course. Help Diana with her immediate needs, say $15,000, but structure it formally with proper loan documents and a repayment schedule. I can draw up the paperwork. And what would you expect in return for this service? I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. Martin chuckled. Your grandfather warned me you were sharp. I don't expect payment, Vanessa, but I would like your permission to join the board of trustees for your trust. In an advisory capacity only, he added quickly. Your control would remain absolute. I hadn't expected this. Why? Because Walter asked me to look out for you, and this would give me a formal mechanism to do so, Martin said. And because I believe you have tremendous potential. Your business instincts remind me of your grandfather, but you'll need guidance navigating the legal complexities of managing significant assets at your age. It was a surprisingly straightforward answer. I thought about Grandpa's journal entry about partnerships. The best advisors aren't yes men. They're the ones who tell you what you need to hear, even when it contradicts what you want to hear. I'll consider it, I said finally, and I'll let you know about Diana's loan tomorrow. After ending the call, I opened Grandpa's journal again, searching for insights that might apply to my current dilemma. I found a page where he'd written about family business entanglements. Money between family members is never just money. It's power, expectations, history, and emotion all wrapped up in dollar signs. Proceed with extreme caution and extensive documentation. By evening, I had made my decision. I called Mr. Bennett first, outlining my plan and confirming that the Y Trust had the liquidity to execute it. Then I called Diana. I can help you, I told her before she could launch into whatever persuasive speech she'd prepared. But not with a direct loan. What does that mean? Diana asked warily. It means I'm offering you a job. Silence on the line. Then, a job? What kind of job could you possibly offer me? Property management, I said. Grandpa left me several real estate assets that need attention. I'll be at UCLA in the fall, so I need someone I can trust to handle the day-to-day operations. The position comes with a salary of $5,000 per month, plus a housing allowance that should cover your mortgage. More silence as Diana processed this. You're serious? Completely. You'd report to Mr. Bennett at the trust management company. He'll provide training on the systems and procedures. Your legal background is actually perfect for this role. Lots of tenant issues, contract reviews, that sort of thing. And this is how you're helping me? By making me work for my little sister? Diana's voice had a dangerous edge. No, I corrected. Her. You'd be working for the trust, not for me personally. I'm just the beneficiary. And it's a legitimate job with a competitive salary, not charity. You'd be earning your way forward, which I thought you'd prefer to a loan that would just dig you deeper into debt. I could practically hear Diana calculating in her head. $5,000 monthly, plus a housing allowance was actually more than she'd requested as a loan. And it came with job security she currently lacked. What's the catch? She finally asked. 2 conditions, I said, keeping my voice level. First, absolute confidentiality about the arrangement and about the trust itself. No discussions with Mom and Dad or anyone else. And second, you move back here for at least 6 months. The properties that need managing are local. Diana had been living in Chicago for nearly 5 years, establishing her independence and, more importantly, her distance from our parents' constant scrutiny. Asking her to return home was asking a lot. 6 months, she repeated. Back in Cooper City. Yes, you could stay at Grandpa's house. It's sitting empty otherwise. Another long pause. I could almost see her weighing her dwindling options against her pride. When would I start? She finally asked. Next Monday. Mr. Bennett will email you the employment contract tomorrow. Review it, sign it, and the first month's salary will be deposited immediately to help with your transition. After we hung up, I leaned back in Grandpa's chair, wondering if I had made the right decision. Bringing Diana into the orbit of the trust was risky. It increased the chances that my parents would discover the truth before I was ready to reveal it. But it also gave me a controlled way to begin shifting the family dynamic, starting with the person who had benefited most from my invisibility. The next morning, Mr. Bennett called to confirm that Diana had signed the employment contract first. She was waiting outside our office when we opened, he told me, amusement in his voice. Very eager to begin her new position. Did she have any questions about the trust itself? I asked. Many, Mr. Bennett replied. I provided the information outlined in our discussion, enough to perform her duties effectively, without revealing the full scope or your personal involvement as beneficiary. Thank you, I said, relief washing over me. And the lease inspection? At Oakwood Lane? Scheduled for next week, as required by the new lease terms. We'll present it as routine trust administration. Your father has already confirmed the appointment. I had instructed Mr. Bennett to arrange a formal inspection of my parents' house, my property, as part of solidifying the new lease arrangement. It was a standard landlord practice, but for me, it served another purpose, beginning the process of establishing the trust's authority over the property in my parents' minds. That evening at dinner, Dad mentioned the upcoming inspection with mild annoyance. These trust administrators are being rather officious, he complained, spearing a piece of broccoli. Apparently they need to document the current condition of the property for their files. I'm sure it's just standard procedure, I offered innocently. Trusts have to follow certain protocols. Dad waved his fork dismissively. It's just frustrating. This house has been in the family for 20 years. Suddenly we're being treated like ordinary tenants. If only he knew. When is the inspection? Mom asked, frowning slightly. I'll need to tidy up. Next Thursday morning, Dad replied. Some representative from Bennett Cohen will be coming. I had to take time off work to be here. I can be here instead, I volunteered. I don't have classes that morning. Dad looked relieved. Would you? That would be helpful. Just show them around, answer any questions. Nothing complicated. I can handle it, I assured him, hiding my satisfaction at how perfectly this was working out. I would be present when the trust representative, technically my employee, inspected my property. The irony was almost too delicious. 3 days later, Diana arrived back in town, moving her essential belongings into Grandpa's house while placing the rest in storage. She called me that evening, asking me to come over. When I arrived, I found her sitting at Grandpa's kitchen table, surrounded by property files that Mr. Bennett had provided as part of her orientation. This is substantial, she said, gesturing to the documents spread before her. Grandpa left you all this? The trust, I corrected carefully. He left it to the trust. Diana gave me a measured look. Right. The trust, which you control. I'm the beneficiary, I said, maintaining the technical distinction. The trust is managed by professionals. Professionals who now apparently include me. Diana closed the file she'd been reading. So, 3 commercial properties downtown, plus Grandpa's house, plus... Well, the files for the 3rd residential property are incomplete. I'm still waiting. On those. My parents' house. My house. Mr. Bennett had been careful to withhold those documents for now, as we'd discussed. You'll get everything you need to do your job properly, I assured her. One step at time. Diana leaned back, studying me with new eyes. You know, I never really saw it before. Saw what? How much you're like Grandpa. Not just in looks, though. You definitely got his eyes, but in how you think. Strategic, patient. She shook her head slightly. I always thought you were just quiet. But you were watching, weren't you? Learning. I wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected insight. Grandpa was a good teacher. And I was a terrible sister, Diana said bluntly. I know that, I've always known it, actually. This frank admission caught me off guard. Diana, no, let me finish, she interrupted. I spent years making sure the spotlight stayed on me because I was terrified of what would happen if it ever swung your way. You were always smarter than me, more disciplined. If Mom and Dad ever bothered to really look at you, to see what you were capable of, she trailed off, then laughed bitterly. Well, I guess Grandpa did look, and now here we are. The raw honesty in her voice was unsettling. This wasn't the Diana I knew, the polished, confident golden child who never showed vulnerability. I don't want your job security to depend on my goodwill, I said carefully. That's not a healthy dynamic for either of us. The position is legitimate. Diana, you have real responsibilities, and you'll be evaluated on your performance, not our history. Diana nodded slowly. Fair enough. And the confidentiality clause? About keeping the trust's existence quiet from Mom and Dad? That's non-negotiable, I said firmly. They'll know everything when the time is right. And when will that be? Diana asked, her eyes sharp with curiosity. I thought about the upcoming inspection, about the careful groundwork I was laying, about Grandpa's advice to proceed strategically rather than emotionally. Soon, I said simply. Sooner than I originally planned, actually. Diana seemed to accept this, turning back to her files with newfound focus. Then I'd better get up to speed quickly. I have a feeling things are about to get interesting around here. She had no idea how right she was. As I drove home that night, I realized that the dynamic with Diana had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just my employee now, she was potentially my ally in what was to come. The following Thursday, as Dad headed to work, promising to be home by noon for the inspection, I received a text from Mr. Bennett. Inspector will arrive at 11:30. Will be accompanied by Martin Kessler, who has agreed to join the Trust Advisory Board. Thought you should know in advance. Martin was coming to the inspection. This wasn't part of the plan. I texted back quickly. Whose idea was this? The response came promptly. His. Says it will help establish proper authority with your father. Beneficial. In long run. I considered this unexpected development. Martin's presence would certainly lend gravitas to the inspection, but it also introduced an unpredictable element. How would Dad react to seeing his law partner show up as part of the trust's team? As it turned out, I wouldn't have to wonder for long. At 10:45, nearly an hour before the scheduled inspection, Dad's car pulled into the driveway. He'd come home early, probably to review any sensitive documents before the trust representatives arrived. What he didn't know was that Diana had also decided to come early, to get a first look at the mysterious third property in her portfolio. Her car pulled in right behind Dad's. I watched from the living room window as they exited their vehicles simultaneously, mirror expressions of surprise on their faces. Diana? What are you doing here? Dad asked, clearly confused. Diana froze momentarily, then recovered. Dad, I came to see Vanessa. Sisterly catch-up. Dad's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You drove all the way from Chicago for a sisterly catch-up? In the middle of a workday? Before Diana could respond, another car pulled into our driveway. A sleek black sedan I recognized as Martin's. The trust inspection team had arrived early, too. As Martin stepped out of his car, accompanied by Mr. Bennett and another man I didn't recognize, Dad's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Martin? What the hell is going on here? The carefully structured reveal I had planned was collapsing. In real time, the players all converging at once in an unscripted confrontation. As I stepped onto the front porch to intercept this collision of secrets, I realized that the moment of truth had arrived. Ready or not. The expression on Dad's face as Martin approached him in our driveway was something I'll never forget. Confusion, giving way to suspicion, then hardening into defensiveness. I stepped off the porch and into the fray, determined to take control of the situation before it spiraled further. Dad, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, I can explain. He turned to me, eyes narrowed. Explain what, exactly? Why my law partner is showing up at my house with trust administrators. Why your sister is suddenly back in town on a Thursday morning. Martin stepped forward, extending his hand professionally. Robert, I apologize for the confusion. Perhaps we should all go inside and discuss this properly. Discuss what? Dad demanded, ignoring the outstretched hand. Martin, what the hell is going on? Mr. Bennett cleared his throat. Mr. Reynolds, I'm Jeffrey Bennett of Bennett, Cohen & Associates. We manage the Walter Reynolds Trust. As you know, we're here to conduct the scheduled property inspection. Dad's gaze darted between Martin and Mr. Bennett, then landed on Diana, who stood frozen beside her car. And what's your role in this, Diana? Last I heard, you were handling corporate acquisitions in Chicago. Diana shot me a panicked look. I gave her a slight nod, releasing her from her confidentiality obligation. The time for secrets was over. I work for the trust now, Dad, she said quietly, as of Monday. Dad's face flushed red. You what? I interjected firmly. We should continue this conversation inside. 5 minutes later, we were all seated in the living room. My living room, in my house, though Dad didn't know that. Yet, Mom had been called home from her yoga class and now sat beside Dad on the sofa, her expression vacillating between confusion and alarm. I'd like to start by apologizing for the dramatic convergence, Martin said, his lawyer voice in full effect. This isn't how anyone planned for this meeting to unfold. What meeting? Dad demanded. This was supposed to be a routine property inspection. Martin glanced at me. Vanessa, I believe this is your moment. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, remembering Grandpa's advice. When delivering difficult news, lead with facts, not emotions. Facts can be processed. Emotions just cloud the issue. 6 months ago, I began, Grandpa Walter created a trust, the Vanessa Reynolds Trust. He transferred several properties into it, including his personal residence, 2 commercial buildings downtown, and I met Dad's gaze directly. This house. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's face went completely blank, a defense mechanism I'd seen him deploy in tense situations. That's not possible, he finally said. This house has been in our family for 20 years. I've been paying the mortgage directly to my father's management company. You've been paying rent, Mr. Bennett corrected gently. Walter maintained ownership of the property throughout that period. The arrangement was structured to appear as a family mortgage, but legally, you've always been tenants. Dad turned to Martin, betrayal etched across his features. You knew about this? All these years? Martin nodded slowly. I did. Walter asked me to help structure the arrangement when you first moved in. He wanted to provide for your family while protecting the asset. And now this trust owns our home? Mom asked, her voice trembling. Who controls the trust? All eyes returned to me. I do, I said simply. As of my 18th birthday last month, I'm the trustee and primary beneficiary. Dad's laugh was hollow, disbelieving. You're saying my 17-year-old daughter is my landlord? This is absurd. She's 18 now, Diana pointed out quietly. And it's not absurd. It's actually quite brilliantly structured. The lawyer in her couldn't help but admire the legal architecture, even as the daughter and sister in her recognized the emotional earthquake it was causing. Mom looked between Diana and me, comprehension slowly dawning. That's why you're back in town, she said to Diana. You're working for Vanessa. For the trust, Diana corrected, though the distinction hardly mattered now. Dad stood abruptly, pacing the room. This is Walter's idea of a joke. Some kind of posthumous power play. Well, it won't stand. We'll contest the trust. Undue influence, diminished capacity. There are a dozen grounds we could cite. I wouldn't advise that course of action, Robert, Martin said calmly. The trust is ironclad. Walter was of sound mind and body when he created it, with multiple witnesses and medical documentation to that effect. Challenging it would be costly, protracted, and ultimately unsuccessful. Dad turned to me, his expression a mixture of anger and bewilderment. Why would he do this? Give everything to you. The question hung in the air, the real heart of the matter finally exposed. Why me and not him? Why me and not Diana? The same questions that had shaped our family dynamic for years, now reversed. I thought about all the possible answers I could give. I could be cruel, listing every instance where they had overlooked me, favored Diana, dismissed my dreams. I could be righteous, pointing out how they had given away my college fund without a second thought. There was power in this moment, power to hurt them as I had been hurt. But Grandpa's journal entry came back to me. The true test of character isn't how you act when you're powerless, but what you do when you hold all the cards. He did it because he saw something in me that you didn't, I said finally. Not because he loved you less, but because he wanted to ensure I had options you weren't providing. Like my college education. Mom flinched. That's not fair, Vanessa. We explained about your college fund. You explained that my future was less important than Diana's condo down payment, I interrupted, keeping my voice level despite the emotion building in my chest. Grandpa made sure I had alternatives. Dad collapsed back onto the sofa, the fight seemingly draining out of him. So what happens now? You evict us? Raise the rent? What's your play here? Nothing changes with the house, I said. Your lease continues as established. The rent stays the same. This isn't about punishing you. Then what is it about? Mom asked softly. I looked around the room at the faces watching me. Dad's defensive anger, Mom's confusion, Diana's newfound respect, Martin's quiet approval, Mr. Bennett's professional neutrality. This moment would define our relationship moving forward, and suddenly I understood exactly what Grandpa had been preparing me for. It's about recognition, I said. For years, I've been invisible in this family. My achievements overlooked, my dreams dismissed, my needs secondary. That ends today. I'm going to UCLA in the fall, fully funded by my trust. I'll study real estate development, just like I always wanted. And when I graduate, I'll take over active management of all the trust properties, including this house. Turned specifically to Dad. You're not just my father anymore. You're also my tenant. And I'm not just your daughter. I'm a property owner with responsibilities and rights. Our relationship needs to adjust to accommodate both realities. Dad looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. You sound like him, he said finally. Like my father. I'll take that as a compliment, I replied. What about my job? Diana asked, breaking the tense silence that followed. With the trust? That's entirely up to you, I said. The offer was legitimate. The trust needs proper management while I'm at school. You're qualified, and now that everything's in the open, you can decide if you want to stay on. Diana nodded slowly. I think I do. It's a fresh start. Mom stood, suddenly, moving to the fireplace where family photos lined the mantel. Most featured Diana, her graduations, her achievements, her smiling face at the center of every family gathering. There was only one of me alone, a school portrait from 3 years ago. We've failed you, she said softly, touching the frame of my photo. I've failed you. I never realized. It's not too late to change, I said, gentler now. That's the point of all this. Not revenge. Change. The inspection that followed was subdued, professional. Mr. Bennett and his colleague documented the condition of the house while Dad sat silently at the kitchen table, processing the seismic shift in his reality. Mom followed the inspectors anxiously, as if their report might somehow determine our family's fate. When they finally left, Only Diana remained with us, awkwardly perched on the edge of the sofa like a visitor rather than the daughter who had grown up in this house. "I should go," she said, rising. "I have a lot of trust documents to review before tomorrow." "Diana," Dad called as she reached the door. "Were you really fired? From the firm in Chicago?" She paused, hand on the doorknob. "Yes, office politics like I told Vanessa." She hesitated, then added, "I was too proud to tell you. Too afraid of being a disappointment." Dad's laugh was hollow. "Looks like we all had our secrets." After Diana left, my parents retreated to their bedroom, the murmur of intense conversation drifting down the hallway. I sat alone in the kitchen, emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. The truth was finally out, the weight of secrecy lifted. My phone buzzed with a text from Martin. "You handled that with remarkable grace. Walter would be proud." I smiled, thinking of Grandpa's journal tucked safely in my backpack. He had prepared me for this moment in ways I was only beginning to understand. Few minutes later, Dad emerged from the bedroom and sat across from me at the kitchen table. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression humbled in a way I'd never seen before. "Your grandfather once told me that I spent too much time looking up at the heights others had reached, and not enough time looking at what was growing right in front of me," he said quietly. I didn't understand what he meant until today. He extended his hand across the table, palm up, not commanding or authoritative as it had always been, but open and vulnerable. "I don't expect forgiveness, Vanessa, but I'm hoping we can find a new way forward. As family. And yes, as tenant and landlord too." I looked at his outstretched hand, thinking about power and choices, about Grandpa's wisdom and my own path forward. Then I reached out and took it, feeling the first tentative bridge forming across the chasm of our past. "I'd like that," I said. "I think Grandpa would too." 8 months later, the UCLA campus sparkled in the late winter sunshine as I crossed the quad toward the business school. Palm trees swayed against a perfectly blue California sky, a stark contrast to the snow-covered streets back home in Cooper City. I'd been at college for nearly 6 months, and the novelty of year-round warmth still hadn't worn off. My phone buzzed with an incoming video call from Diana. I answered, balancing my laptop bag as her face appeared on screen. "Perfect timing," I said. "I just finished my urban development seminar." Diana's hair was pulled back in a professional bun, her expression focused. "I'm sending over the quarterly reports for your review. The Jenkins Street property has increased in value by 12% since we implemented the renovation plan. And the new tenant lease? Signed yesterday. 5-year term with the escalation clause we discussed." It was still strange seeing my sister in this role. Competent, detail-oriented, and surprisingly devoted to her position as the trust's property manager. What had begun as a financial lifeline for her had evolved into something she genuinely excelled at. "How are things at home?" I asked, taking a seat on a bench beneath a towering palm. Diana's expression softened. "Dad's actually asked me to help with some efficiency improvements at his firm. Can you believe it? After years of keeping his work and family separate, he's finally acknowledging I might have useful input." "That's progress," I said, genuinely pleased. "And Mom?" "She's redecorating the living room," Diana said with a small smile. "Finally took down that shrine to my academic achievements and created a more balanced family wall. Your UCLA acceptance letter is framed right in the center. The changes at home hadn't happened overnight. The first few weeks after the revelation had been tense, with Dad oscillating between wounded pride and reluctant acceptance of the new reality. Mom had overcorrected initially, suddenly treating me like the golden child, which was almost as uncomfortable as being ignored had been. But gradually, a new equilibrium had emerged. Not perfect, but healthier, more balanced. "Have they mentioned the lease renewal?" I asked. The 1-year agreement on my parents' house, my house, was coming up for renewal next month. Diana hesitated. That's actually the other reason I called. Dad wants to discuss terms. He says he has a proposal for you. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of proposal? He wouldn't say. Just that he wants to talk to you directly when you're home for spring break next week. Curiosity piqued, I promised, to call Dad that evening. After ending the call with Diana, I opened my laptop to check the trust's financial dashboard, another of Grandpa's innovations that helped me stay connected to the business while focusing on my education. The properties were performing well, with the commercial buildings downtown nearly fully leased and generating steady income. Grandpa's house, Diana's current residence, had appreciated significantly thanks to a new development breaking ground nearby. As I scrolled through the figures, a notification popped up from the trust's legal department. Martin had flagged a document for my review, a proposal for a new investment opportunity, a mixed-use development on the edge of Cooper City's revitalizing waterfront district. I clicked through the details, impressed by the thoroughness of the analysis. This was exactly the kind of project Grandpa would have loved, forward-thinking, community-oriented, with solid financials and reasonable risk. But what caught my eye was the proposed partner on the deal, Reynolds and Kessler Development Group. Dad's new venture with Martin, apparently. This was the first I'd heard of it. That evening, I called Dad from my dorm room. "Vanessa," he answered warmly, his tone so different from the dismissive distraction I'd grown up with. "How's my favorite UCLA freshman?" "Busy but good," I replied. "Diana mentioned you wanted to discuss the lease renewal." "Straight to business," Dad chuckled. "You really are your grandfather's heir." "I learned from the best," I said, surprised by how easily I could joke about it now. "So what's this proposal Diana mentioned?" Dad cleared his throat. "Actually, it's related to something larger Martin and I have been working on. A new development company, focused on revitalizing some of the neglected areas downtown." "I saw the waterfront proposal," I said. "Martin sent it over today." "And?" Dad asked, a note of uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice. "It's solid. Good financials, strong concept. We'd like the trust to come in as a primary investor," Dad said, "with you as an active partner in the development strategy." I leaned back against my dorm room wall, processing this. "You want to go into business with me?" "Is that so surprising?" Dad asked quietly. "You've proven yourself quite capable, and I've proven myself quite blind to that capability for far too long." The proposal wasn't just about business. It was an acknowledgement, perhaps the most meaningful one he could offer. Professional respect from a man who had defined himself by his professional accomplishments. "I'll need to review the complete proposal," I said, maintaining the business-like approach Grandpa had taught me. "Have Martin send over the full package." "Of course," Dad agreed. "But there's one more thing." "About the house?" "What about it?" Dad took a deep breath. "Instead of renewing the lease, your mother and I would like to buy it. Properly this time, with a fair market mortgage through a bank. No more complicated arrangements." I hadn't expected this. "You want to buy the house from the trust?" "From you," Dad corrected gently. "We want to buy our home from our daughter, transparently, honestly, the way it should have been all along." The symmetry wasn't lost on me. My parents, who had taken my college fund without hesitation, now wanted to legitimately purchase something from me, acknowledging my ownership, my authority in the transaction. "I'll have Mr. Bennett draw up the paperwork," I said, smiling at how automatically the business protocols now came to me. "We'll need an independent appraisal, of course." "Of course," Dad agreed, and I could hear the smile in his voice too. Pride, not condescension. After we hung up, I opened Grandpa's journal, now well-worn from frequent consultation. I flipped to one of my favorite entries. "The measure of success isn't in the properties you acquire, but in the relationships you build. Real estate may appreciate over time, but nothing compounds interest quite like mutual respect." As I looked, out my dorm room window at the California sunset, I thought about how far we'd all come. Diana finding her professional footing, Dad acknowledging my capabilities, Mom creating space for a more balanced family narrative, and me, no longer the forgotten daughter, the family afterthought. Now I was Vanessa Reynolds, UCLA student, property owner, potential business partner, and reluctant catalyst for a family transformation none of us could have predicted. Grandpa had given me property, yes. But his real gift had been the leverage to reshape our family's foundation, building something stronger, more balanced, and ultimately more valuable than any real estate portfolio could ever be. Numbers never lie, Grandpa used to say. But sometimes, the most important calculations aren't about dollars and cents at all. 2 years later, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Cooper City Waterfront Commons was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. I straightened my blazer and checked my reflection in the hotel mirror one last time. At 20, I still looked younger than most of the development partners I worked with, but the confidence I'd gained over the past 2 years generally compensated for that. "Ready for your big moment?" Diana asked, leaning against the doorframe of my hotel room. At 30, my sister had transformed from the status-obsessed corporate climber I'd grown up with into a shrewd property management executive with an eye for detail that rivaled Grandpa's. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, tucking Grandpa's journal into my bag, a ritual before important events. The Waterfront Commons had been my first major project as an active partner in Reynolds and Kessler Development Group. What had begun as Dad's tentative olive branch had evolved into a genuine collaboration, with me contributing innovative design concepts I'd learned at UCLA, and Dad providing the practical experience of navigating city politics. "Dad's already at the site," Diana said, checking her phone. "He says the mayor arrived early and is making helpful suggestions." Her air quotes and eye roll made me laugh. "So he's micromanaging everything?" "Naturally. Mom's keeping him distracted with coffee and compliments on his tie." We headed downstairs to the waiting car. As Diana drove us toward the waterfront, I marveled at how much our hometown had changed, and how much we had changed with it. The once-neglected industrial waterfront had been transformed into a vibrant mixed-use development with affordable housing, local businesses, and green spaces. The trust had provided significant investment capital, while Reynolds and Kessler had managed the development process. The project had already won a regional urban planning award for its innovative approach to community revitalization. "Have you given any more thought to Martin's retirement offer?" Diana asked as we neared the site. Martin had announced his intention to step back from active practice 6 months ago, offering to sell his share of the firm to me upon my graduation next year. "I'm still weighing the options," I said. "Part of me wants to focus entirely on the development side rather than the legal work." "You could do both," Diana suggested. "That's what Grandpa would have done." "Probably," I agreed. "But I'm not Grandpa." Diana glanced at me. "No, you're not. You're blazing your own trail. He would have loved that even more." As we pulled into the VIP parking area, I spotted Mom directing volunteers with her characteristic attention to detail. She'd taken on the community relations aspect of the project, leveraging her real estate connections to build local support. After years of living in Dad's professional shadow, she'd found her own niche in our growing family business. "There's my girls," she called, waving us over. "Just in time. The press is already setting up." The transformation in our family relationships hadn't been instantaneous or perfect. There had been tense board meetings, heated disagreements about investment strategies, and occasional slips into old patterns. But beneath it all ran a current of mutual respect that had never existed before, a foundation strong enough to weather the inevitable storms. Dad was deep in conversation with the mayor when we approached the podium area. He excused himself immediately when he saw us. "The woman of the hour," he said, embracing me with genuine pride. "This is your project, Vanessa. You should be the one cutting the ribbon." "It's our project," I corrected him. Reynolds and Kessler and Reynolds. It had become our private joke, acknowledging Diana's crucial role in managing the trust properties that funded our ventures. As the ceremony began and various officials made their speeches, I found myself scanning the growing crowd. Local business, owners who'd taken a chance on our development, families who'd moved into the affordable housing units, former skeptics who'd eventually become our strongest advocates. This wasn't just a real estate project. It was community building in the truest sense, creating something that served needs beyond our own profit margins. Grandpa would have approved. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the podium with Grandpa's journal tucked under my arm. 3 years ago, I thought success meant proving my worth to others, I began. Today, I understand that true success lies in creating value for the community around us. This development represents that philosophy, spaces where people can live, work, and connect, regardless of income level or background. I glanced at my family standing proudly in the front row. None of this would have been possible without the vision of my grandfather, Walter Reynolds, who taught me that property isn't just about ownership, it's about stewardship. About recognizing potential where others see only problems. After the ribbon was cut and the photographs taken, as the crowd dispersed to tour the new development, an elderly woman approached me. Her worn hands and dignified bearing reminded me instantly of Grandpa. "You must be Walter's granddaughter," she said, studying me intently. I'd recognize those eyes anywhere. "Yes, I am," I replied, intrigued. "Did you know my grandfather?" She smiled. "We served on the City Planning Commission together years ago. Walter and I were usually the only voices arguing for affordable housing requirements when everyone else wanted luxury condos." "That sounds like Grandpa," I said, smiling at this glimpse of his public legacy. "He spoke about you, you know," she continued. "Even when you were just a little thing, said you had the heart to see people, not just properties." She gestured toward the development around us. Looks like he was right. As she moved away to join the tours, Dad stepped up beside me. "She's right, you know," he said quietly. "I spent years looking at properties as assets on a balance sheet. Dad, your grandfather, always saw the human element. So do you." Coming from Dad, this comparison meant everything. Later that evening, our family gathered at my parents' home, the house they now properly owned, for a celebration dinner. The dining room table that had once been the site of so much favoritism and dismissal was now a place of equalizing connection. "I've been thinking," Dad said as we finished dessert, "about expanding the foundation." The Walter Reynolds Foundation had been established last year to support affordable housing initiatives, funded by a percentage of the trust's profits. It had been Dad's idea, a way to honor Grandpa's values while creating a lasting legacy. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "Educational scholarships," Mom suggested before Dad could answer. "For first-generation college students interested in urban planning and development. With mentorship opportunities through the firm," Diana added, building on the concept immediately. As they enthusiastically outlined their vision, I opened Grandpa's journal to a blank page near the end. He'd left several empty pages, as if knowing I'd need space to continue the legacy in my own handwriting. I began to write. The measure of Grandpa's true success wasn't in the properties he acquired, or even the trust he created for me. It was in how his values continue to ripple outward, transforming not just my life but our entire family, and now extending into our community. Some inheritances can't be measured in dollars. They're calculated in changed perspectives, renewed relationships, and lives improved. Today, standing on the waterfront that Grandpa probably envisioned long before any of us, I realized that his greatest gift wasn't making me my family's landlord. It was teaching me to build something more valuable than any real estate empire. A foundation of respect, purpose, and genuine connection that appreciates with every passing year. Vanessa Reynolds. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.